where the ghosts and the living live side by side and they work together. And
I feel like that's New Orleans just as a whole.
yeah,
And
I do
I mean,
too.
it's truthfully probably one of the best descriptions of that city, is that juxtaposition between the living and the dead and the good and the evil, and just how it all, we talk about gumbo being, basically a mixture of all kinds of things that have just simmered there together. And having done that, all of those unique ingredients simmered for so long, it's become its own thing. And that's New Orleans. I mean, it truly is a gumbo, because all of those people, all of those traditions, the living, the dead, the good, the bad, it all is accepted as New Orleans. And that's just what the place is. And it makes it a brilliant backdrop for a lot of stories, whether they're paranormal or not. It's just a fascinating place. And I like using the city as much as a character as anything else. It's the setting, but to me, it lives and breathes. And so in the book, it kind of does too. It's very personified in the setting and the descriptions of the setting. And that's because there's nothing about that city that's not alive to me.
And you just visited there recently, didn't you?
I did, about a week and a half
Tell us
ago.
about that. Yeah, tell us a little bit about your trip.
It was great and weird all at the same time. Of course, the city's been hit pretty hard by coronavirus. COVID hit New Orleans with a vengeance. It was one of the hot spots for a while. Lots of businesses did not survive that. There's a lot of places in New Orleans that are boarded up, and that was sad to see. The city will come back. It will always come back. I mean, it's down, it's not out. But then the other thing that was sort of looming when I went down there was Hurricane Delta. And so I go down on Wednesday. Delta is scheduled to make landfall on Friday. And so, I told Mike Everhart, who I adore, I said, well, I'm about to do the most Nola Nash thing that has ever been done. I am going to New Orleans to stay in a haunted hotel with a hurricane coming. I am either an idiot or a badass. And Mike texted back and said, badass.
Heck yeah.
We're going to go with that. Thank you, Mike. I'm going to go with that. So I did go down there, and I think largely because of the hurricane, the first few days that I was there, the city was, there were no tourists around hardly. Things were shut that would not have been shut even with coronavirus having closed a lot of things down. And so it was wild walking down some of these streets with literally no one else on them, which is so strange. If you've ever been in New Orleans, that is an almost surreal experience in itself, was to be so alone in the city, like in the quarter, no one. It was so strange. A friend of mine and I were down there and went to go get dinner the first night I was there. And of course, it's a Wednesday night. It's about 9:30. And she's like, oh, you haven't eaten? And I said, no, I haven't, because I flew in at like 7. And she said, well, let's go get you some food. I was like, okay. So we go walking around. It's 9:30 in the French Quarter. We couldn't find anywhere that was open with food. What are we going to do? It's like, well, I guess we can get back to that po' boy shop back there, but it didn't look great. But we finally found a place that was open on Bourbon Street. We ended up sitting on a balcony, had a lovely meal, but it was basically a bar on Bourbon that just to be open had to serve food. And that's kind of the mayor's thing right now. The bars can be open if they're serving food. One of the weirdest things was to walk by Pat O'Brien's and see it boarded up. It was closed because they're not equipped to sell food. And so they're not open right now. Super weird to walk past Pato's and it's closed. But, this particular place had a kitchen, and so they were making food. And so we ordered food and had a hurricane on the balcony on Bourbon Street with just a handful of people down below that we were walking by and listening to their conversations float up. But 9:30 on a Wednesday night on Bourbon Street, where we finally found food. So it was a strange experience, I got to tell you. But it was also a really cool experience for me to see that city as if it was only for me. Like it was my city while I was down there, because I was so alone. The day that Delta made landfall, Friday, I mean, it pushed to the west, it hit Lake Charles again, which was so sad. And I do have family in Lake Charles, and that it was hard to know that they were about to get hit again. But I was sitting in front of St. Louis Cathedral, Jackson Square, me and a little thing of watermelon that I got from Rouse's Market that was, up in the quarter, just trying to find something to nibble on for lunch. And I'm just sitting there in like 30-mile-an-hour winds by myself in front of St. Louis Cathedral as the hurricane's making landfall. We're getting all the wind on the backside of it. I was just like, this is so strange, but I kind of liked it. So it was great for taking pictures, which was really one of the reasons I went down there, was to take some pictures, because we do use my photography for various things that we do for marketing and book covers and things like that. So I was down there to do some of that. But it was great because there weren't a lot of people in my pictures. They would have to be cropped out. But at the same time, it was eerie. It was very eerie to be down there with it so deserted. But things did pick up on Saturday and Sunday. So the weekend after the hurricane was no longer a danger. Flooding was not a problem. Then the weekender tourists started to come back in Saturday and Sunday, and life picked up again. So it was good to see that, because if I had left on Friday, I would have been really, really sad for the city of New Orleans. It was a sad, odd time, but to see the life kind of coming back on the weekend made me feel a little bit better. But it was a great trip. I got to stay in a haunted hotel.
I watched
that. Was
really that. The light moving.
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Cool. Very cool.
The little girl.
Uh-huh.
That little girl ghost. Yeah.
Yep. So Sarah and Philip, whatever, we got Phil, but we're assuming that was short for Phil or Philip. And we were on St. Philip, so we were at the corner of St. Philip and Bourbon, which is the Jean Lafitte Hotel and Guest House. And it is directly across the street from Jean Lafitte's blacksmith shop. And this house, it was a mansion on Bourbon, and it was so cool. I mean, I was the only one staying in the mansion part. There's a newer part of it that's kind of built on the back side of it, and there were a couple of people staying there, and the couple who owns it and runs it, they live in that part of it. I was the only one in the mansion. Of course, a hurricane's coming, so like even if they had people that were had reservations, they'd likely canceled them. But the lady hands me the keys when I checked into the room that I had chosen, and she said, "Did you choose 21?" And I said, "Yes." Why? Why do you ask? I knew why she was asking, but I was kind of curious to see what she would tell me, not knowing what I knew about that room, about the hotel. And she said, "Oh, no reason. It's just that people who are in 21, especially when we don't really have other reservations, have usually asked for it." I said, I did. And she's like, okay. So it was this weird conversation. Like, she didn't want to tell me what she knew about that room, just in case I didn't know about that room, and I wasn't going to tell her that I knew about that room. So it was a standoff of information. So it was kind of a funny exchange. So I knew what I was getting into when I chose that room, and I chose the hotel. And it was a very, very cool night. My friend who joined me down there, Willa Lemachant, she is a psychic medium in New Orleans, and she has great stories to tell of her childhood and things that she saw, and just kind of how she began to understand what she was, and all of her gifts and talents. But she also does paranormal investigations, and so she brought her equipment with her to the room. And so she met me there not long after I arrived at the hotel. And it was just a lot of fun to talk to the ghosts, and knowing they were there, and then to actually have the chandelier move. And it moved a lot. The little video clip that you saw, Christine, was just a snippet of what that chandelier had done all night long. And even in the morning, I woke up that morning, I look up, and there's the chandelier again. I'm like, good morning. Y'all have a good night. Because they're clearly there. And it was wild. I was just laying there in the bed watching the chandelier over my head, just swaying. And it's a huge antique crystal chandelier, and it's just rocking. It was really very, very interesting. And no one else was staying in the mansion. I was the only one staying in that part of the house. We went to dinner, and when we came back from our hike around the quarter to find food on Bourbon Street, we went back to get Willow's equipment and things out of the room. And after we had talked to the ghost, the chandelier was moving, and like all of this other stuff was going on. As we walked out, I left the light on. And I didn't say anything to Willow, but for me, it was just kind of like, I'm not walking back into a dark room with that. It's just not. Never felt like there was any animosity or anything in the room. Never felt, in danger in any way. It just felt like, spirits needing company, wanted to talk or whatever. I left the light on. And so I locked the door. It was old key lock, it wasn't even like a key card kind of thing. Just locked the door. And I walked out. And Willow had noticed but didn't say anything. We go back in, and I unlocked the door, and they'd given me the keypad, because they were going to bed, the couple that owned it. It was late, And so I had to let us in through the keypad to the front door, and we go up the stairs, and I unlock my door, and the light switch was off. Like,
Nope.
okay, don't waste the electricity. Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
So the light was off. And then later, I was, after I kind of got ready for bed, and I was like, oh yeah, one of my students wanted me to take video with a flash on my phone to see what I could pick up. And so I had plugged in my phone, and I set the alarm and everything for getting up the next morning. I had gone and brushed my teeth because every time it's the same routine. I set my alarm, I put it back on my home screen, make sure I didn't, forget to answer text messages or whatever. I wasn't going to get any text messages because I'm an idiot, and I left my phone on airplane mode, so nobody was texting me anyway. But I don't know, it's like, there's a mistake. But I put it over there, and I was like, done for the night. And then I went and got ready for bed and all that. And I was like, oh yeah, I forgot to take the video. And I'd gone across the room and turned the light switch off. And I was like, I got to do the video thing. So I turned the light switch on, and I go all the way back around to the bed. I pick up my phone, and the camera was on. And I was like, okay, yeah, we're going to take some video now. That's what we're going to do. Thank you, Sarah.
They were ready for you.
Sarah was hanging out with me the whole time, the little girl. The house at one point had been used as an orphanage for children whose parents died of yellow fever. And of course, then the children, it wiped out that city so bad. And so the children died too. And when we asked Sarah how she died, she said sick. So she was one of the kids that died of yellow fever. And anywhere that I was, the meters would light way up, like all the way to red. Like, she decided she liked me. I brought her toys. I knew that there were children in the house. And so I brought a little porcelain doll and a ball. And so I guess she liked the fact that I brought her toys. And it's like, oh, she's come to play with me. And so she hung out with me. Like, the skin was all like goose pimply, and like hair standing up on end, and like tingly, is like standing too close to like an electric wire. It was like just like buzzing almost. It was such a weird feeling. But it was Sarah. It was just like she's hanging out with me, and she sat in the middle of the bed most of the evening because we set the meter in the middle of the bed, and it would just go off. And we're like, Sarah's on the bed. And so, she stayed there all night long. Willa left the meter with me to kind of see if I could tell where she was hanging out with me. And right there in the middle of the bed, there's nothing electrical, nothing that would ever have picked that up, and that the meter would have picked up. And she sat there in the bed with me. And so I told her a bedtime story. And then it was just like, well, we're going to do this. We're just going to hang out. And so then there was Phil. Phil died from a fall, as he said. We don't know much about Phil, but we know he was there, and he died in a fall at some point. And then the next morning when I was getting dressed and taking a shower and everything, I was like, all right, guys, I'm going to take a shower, Phil. You stay out here. It's like just talking to them. Like, you can't come. I decided, if they're here and clearly physically able to do things, we're just going to hang out. Like, they just need some company. And so it was kind of that weird little invisible companions, that whole little bit of that time at Lafitte. So it was a lot of fun to be able to talk to them and to kind of see all of those interesting things happen. Is exactly what I had hoped was going to happen for that trip. But I kept saying, I'm the one that wants all of that to happen, so it's probably not, because that's the way it seems to work. But it was exciting to actually have all of that stuff happen, and it was great fun to have Willow there to see it all too. So I was like, I'm not crazy, and I've got it on video, so I know I'm not crazy. But it was a lot of fun and very interesting stuff. And Lafitte, and the Lafitte brothers and that property actually will feature slightly in Crescent City Soul, which is the third one. So there was a reason actually that I stayed at Lafitte. That was intentional. Part of it had to do with the haunted hotel. Part of it has to do with the Lafitte brothers.
So as a warning for anybody who's going to stay in room 21 of that hotel, the ghost of the little girl is now tech savvy.
Yes, she is.
Yeah. Yep.
She is tech savvy. She will turn your phone on. And I do have video too of when I did turn the phone on. It was like Sarah said, I'm going to play with the phone. Okay. She's this little tiny voice that came through the speaker. So we know she was a little bitty girl. It was so cute, this little voice. And when I did the video with the flash on, there are like orbs, like little white dots just zigging all around the screen on that video. And it was just crazy. I didn't post that one, so that one you guys haven't seen. but it was wild. Like all these little like, doom, 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 doom. And I'm like, Sarah's showing off. Like she wanted her 15 minutes of fame. It was just like, okay, we're going to play with the phone. Like, so
you should find a way to work her into the third book.
She may have to work her way into the third book. If she doesn't work her way into this one, because she would have died in the mid-1850s, in the 1850 epidemic. The Sylvie's Pen series takes place in 1850s New Orleans. And so more likely that she would work her way into the third book of that series, because that one is 1850, 51, 51, 52. And so 53 would be the third book. So she's more likely to land in that one.
Yeah, but you could have her mother in the book, in book 3.
Could. Absolutely could.
You should do some research, see if you could find out her mother's name.
I don't know. It's hard to get research for that era because of so many deaths so quickly. And, you know, there were so many families that were so impacted by that. It'd be interesting to see if I could find kind of a manifest of the children that were taken in to that orphanage, but those records are so hard to find, so hard to find. Knowing what the building was is about as much as the general research allows. I mean, beyond that, you have to really be into city records, and I'm wondering how much into those city records I could actually delve. That would take another trip down there, maybe, to just sit in the archives and just start going through your papers.
At least you know where you'd say. Maybe Sarah could give you a clue to her mother's name.
She might could help. I mean, if we wanted to put her mother in there, then I bet Sarah could help. That'd be me and Nola going back down to
take the Ouija board with you. And
well, why? She could probably text me. I mean, why do we need a Ouija board?
Oh yeah, she's tech savvy now.
She can use an iPhone.
Right.
Just text me, Sarah. Just tell me what you need to know.
That's funny.
It was so funny. I mean, it was a great trip though, and Willow and I got to hang out for a couple of days. We went up to Destrehan Plantation, which is part of the Sylvia series that, you know, I actually needed to do some research at Destrehan Plantation, which is one of the largest sugarcane plantations in Louisiana, at one point producing most of the sugarcane that was being exported. I mean, it's huge. It was 8 miles deep. It went from the Mississippi River all the way back to Lake Pontchartrain, which is 8 miles straight back. So, and a mile wide. So huge sugarcane plantation. And the house is just stunning. And it was a very, very interesting tour. We actually toured it twice. We did the Destrehan home tour, but then also went back for the Unheard Voices tour, which was led by a Destrehan descendant whose like great-great-grandmother was one of the original Destrehan plantation owner's slaves, but the plantation owner and the great-grandmother had a baby. And so she's the descendant of that child. So she is actually descended of both the planter and the slave. So she leads the tour, which is fascinating because she has so much family history tied up in that plantation just generationally, and what she knows of her family is incredible because they were so tied to that plantation. So those records are a lot easier to come by than some of the other people and their family history might have been. So it's really cool to hear her telling that story because she can kind of tell both sides of it. But, you know, her main lineage is from the enslaved people. And so she gives really more of their background. So it was interesting to take the first tour to hear about the planter and, you know, all the people who lived there in the big home, and then to hear the second story of the people who actually worked that land and kind of their
fascinating. That's so great. I can't wait for this COVID to be over so I can go back down there and take those tours.
Destrehan is a fantastic tour on both sides of those things. So if you get to do the Unheard Voices tour, Diane is incredible. She's really, really phenomenal. And she does some really interesting things because her grandmother, like so many people there, was devout Catholic, but also, you know, very much into voodoo. And so, you know, she would help people with all kinds of things and spells and things. And so Diane learned from her grandmother. And, you know, she said some people learn to cook from their grandmother. I learned how to do this from mine. And, you know, so she even does a demonstration on how to make a great bag and, you know, some of the voodoo traditions that were part of plantation life at that time as well. And just kind of the New Orleans culture and everything from the German coast, which is what the river plantations, you know, that area is referred to as the German coast. And then because originally it was settled by largely German families, which then got taken over by all of the planters and kind of buying up the land from them. But the German coast has so many plantations. I mean, literally we drove 1.5 miles and we had lunch at a different plantation. I mean, that's just, you know, they're one right after the other down the river. And it's fascinating. So many amazing plantations. Another one, Jule, when you get to go down there, one that you would really, truly enjoy is Laura Plantation. And Laura Plantation was owned by Creole Black women.
Wow.
And so Laura has got a tremendous history, and the fact that it was owned by women is a truly interesting history with that one as well. So I highly recommend going down there and taking the tours, and they're just very diverse. You think about, you know, Gone with the Wind and it's all the same, but in Louisiana, it's so not. The laws were very different then, and very different about who could own property, who could own people. I mean, you had free blacks that had either bought their freedom or just were free, actually owned slaves themselves. And so there's a very interesting culture with that as well. In fact, the man who built Destrehan, he was the primary architect and the builder of Destrehan Plantation, earned his freedom during the course of that and was able to buy his own freedom. And later on, he owned his own slaves, but also had, they think, a part to play in the German coast slave uprising, where he actually hid some slaves. So a very interesting mix of what was actually happening with the culture there, and it had a whole lot to do with it.
You have a lot more books to write then.
I do. A lot more books to write. That is absolutely true. And the more I go down there, the more I come up with things that I want to write about. And I mean, it's probably good that I don't live there, because I would just be so inundated all the time. I'd never
you'd be too distracted.
I would be so distracted. At least this keeps it in very piecemeal, you know, okay, I'm going to go research this. I'm going to go look at this now. Because otherwise I'd be, you know, my head on the swivel, and I wouldn't be able to stop long enough to actually get anything written.